ACNFer, since practically nobody took me up on the free editing in exchange for a written review, that deal is officially closed. I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. Also, here's a shout out to Athletic Brewing, my favorite non-alcoholic beer out there. Dry January is coming up. Might be a nice option for you if that's your jam. If you visit athleticbrewing.com and use the promo code BrendanO20 at checkout, you get a little discount. I don't get any money, merely celebrating a nice product. Skip the hangover, man. Skip it.
Oh yeah, I had like some very like gonna eat a pint of ice cream, like to lay on the floor kind of days.
All right, so it's that Atavistian time of the month. So it's up to you whether you want to know some of the story behind the story before you read the story, or read the story before you hear about the story behind the story. Visit magazine.atavist.com and consider subscribing. I don't get any kickbacks, so you don't have to feel like I'm promoting something merely to make a buck. I don't make shit, man. We have Rae Nudson on the show today, this final podcast of 2023, the fourth year of 2020. I've given up all hope that things get better. Rae is a journalist and author of All Made Up, The Power and Pitfalls of Beauty Culture. She's written for The Cut, Paste Magazine, Esquire, and now the Atavist Magazine. That's a nice career so far. She writes a lot about women's health, and that's the ecosystem of this piece for the Atavist, about an OBGYN who took advantage of countless women and performed many procedures on their bodies without consent. It raises questions about who women can trust when they're at their most vulnerable, but also who's culpable and who should pay for the crimes of the doctor. Be sure you're heading to BrendanO'Meara.com for show notes and to sign up for my monthly Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter. There's been an upsetting amount of unsubscribes and lack of growth. It sucks when you've been doing something for more than 10 years, but then it gets lumped into the current glut of newsletters and thus gets dismissed. I guess that's just the market telling me it sucks. Same for the podcast itself. That will soon turn 11. But all you can do is trust you're making something of value, and that it will find the people it means to serve when they're ready for it. First, we are hearing from Seyward Darby, man, who is back from sabbatical, and this piece and her goals for the forthcoming hellscape of a year. She's going to talk a little bit about that. Didn't we just have an election year? Fuck. Okay, so let's just get into it. I'm not here to waste your time. Let's say hi to Seyward, and then we'll meet Rae, okay? Rae. Being on the precipice and doorstep of a new year, what are your goals for the Atavist going forward into 2024, and then also just you as an editor and a journalist yourself?
Yeah, going into 2024 with the Atavist, the goals are modest insofar as I love what we're doing, and we're doing it well, and I want to keep publishing great stories that, showcase great reporting, great writing, just great storytelling. And we already have quite a few stories actually assigned, and we have a ton of copy in hand right now, which just, I think I set too many deadlines like during my sabbatical, basically, because I came back and had a bunch of stories in hand, which is awesome because that means we have, lots to work on, lots to choose from. But it's fun to, already kind of see the shape of the year, and the diversity of stories and whatnot. So yeah, I don't know that I have anything particularly, unique or anything exciting in mind. We just kind of want to keep doing what we're doing. And, the last month especially has been as it is often this time of year, really, really terrible on the media front. Lots of layoffs, closures. Some great news like Jezebel coming back, for instance. But, it's a tough time as it has been for so long in media. I think that the Atavist is kind of on its little island doing its thing. And I think that stability really means something. It certainly means something to me. I think it means something to our contributors and our readers. And so, I really want to make sure that we maintain quality, consistency, and stability, just because, I don't know, it's such a tough time and full of, unwelcome surprises. And if I can keep those minimized, that means I'm doing my job. So yeah, and then oh, we do have our 150th issue coming up. So once upon a time, we had a big plan for our 100th issue to do a live event in New York. We were gonna have various people essentially not read their Atavist stories, but like tell their Atavist stories. We were doing it in conjunction with a storytelling show here in the city called the Tell. Leslie Jameson was going to be there. Barrett Swanson was going to be there. And it was scheduled for March of 2020. So, needless to say, that did not happen. That was a bummer. So, we had our 100th issue and then also our 10th anniversary, all within the pandemic. And so, I would love to do something around our 150th issue, just to, celebrate having had such a good run and the fact that we're still running. So we don't know exactly what we're going to do yet. That's let's see, 4 or 5 issues away, so a couple months, but hopefully we'll do something fun.
And how about you on a writer front, journalist front?
Yeah, I didn't really write much in 2023 just because I was really focused on getting the magazine set up for my sabbatical and then being on my sabbatical. So yeah, I would love to find something in 2024 that I can really sink my teeth into from a reporting and writing standpoint. But I don't have anything in particular in mind right now. I don't know. Some of my favorite projects have felt very random, I guess. Something has just come across my desk or come to my attention, or somebody mentioned something offhand to me. And for me, I need to feel really, really passionate and curious about something to add it to my full-time plate. So hopefully something along those lines will come along, either via an assignment that somebody wants me to do or something I randomly hear and decide that sounds like something I want to dig into.
This is a time of year where maybe people are looking to improve something or maybe level up their ambitions or goals, and you can often speak to the fundamentals of good pitching, and good pitching tends to lead to more stories landed. So if there were, something you could point to that, if people are looking to write, better pitches, for you or for anybody else out there, what might be a couple, 2 or 3 things that you might focus on? Like these are the things that at least get us having a dialogue about potentially assigning a story.
The Atavist is its own weird little thing. And so, pitching for us doesn't necessarily, or the things that work in pitching for us don't necessarily work in pitching for other places. But I think, oftentimes people send us really great ideas, but they don't highlight who the sort of animating character or characters are going to be. And so, it's an event or, this thing that happened, or it's a mystery or whatever. And I can see that, I'm like, okay, cool, that's a good story. But who are the people going to be? Who are going to be the standout characters in the narrative? And so making sure that pitches really showcase who those figures are going to be is really, really important. And that suggestion goes hand in hand with, oftentimes people will read about an event of some kind, I don't know, a murder or again, a mystery or, just something that grabs their interest, and they'll put together a pitch, but they will not have necessarily, done that initial bit of groundwork to identify who your main sources are going to be, how you're going to animate the piece. And so, oftentimes we'll say, well, that can make for a really good story, but, who have you talked to? Who are you going to talk to? Who's agreed to talk to you? And people, we're more likely to assign a story when people have ready and, exciting answers to those questions, as opposed to just, great. Yeah. You read about an interesting thing and, put together a good couple paragraphs about why it would make for a good story, but there's that essential element of why should we assign it to you? Like, how do we know that you're going to be able to get the story? Because there's nothing worse than somebody I mean, there are plenty of things that are worse, but it's always frustrating when, somebody sort of promises to deliver this really great story and then can't because, ultimately they just can't get people to talk to them or can't get the access that they had hoped for. It's always so disappointing. And so if we can sort of do everything we can to ensure that that's not going to come to pass in the pitching and kind of, brainstorming of how a story might work process, the better for us, better for the writer, better for the story.
Very nice. And I think, that leads into Rae's piece here and to the points that you had just laid out for, pitches that tend to, work for you or pitches that don't. What was it about Rae's story when it came across your desk that struck you like, okay, this one has the goods?
Yeah, well, I'm always interested in stories that, it's a legal story. It's a, something of a redemption story. It's also a health story. And we're always interested in, pitches having to do with, we sort of have some, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of like, fringe topic, not fringe, like in terms of mainstream, but, things that we just don't write about that often, like that we don't get that many pitches about. And so getting this pitch about, a doctor who had done wrong to a tremendous number of patients and the sort of, medical landscape was something that definitely grabbed me initially. I will say that things like sports fit into this category as well. Just we don't get as many pitches, or at least pitches that would work for us. And so, yeah, health, sports, science, those kinds of things.
As some of you longtime listeners know, at times I will just interject to provide, I don't know, context or explanation, clarity, I don't know. But in this case, Seyward's saying that they don't get a whole lot of sports pitches, and I'm primarily a sports writer. It should be noted, and I think I noted this a couple months ago, but let's just re-up it. Jonna Meisenholder and Cassidy Randall, their pieces that ran in the Atavist in the same year were both anthologized in Year's Best Sports Writing, the latest edition, like in the main volume, not even notable selection, like 2 Atavist sports stories made that volume. And that's like where I would love to be someday. And here it is. Here is what, Seyward and company were able to do. Okay, this is something of a long interjection, but I just wanted to bring that up. Maybe there's sports writers out there. Consider pitching because they don't really run that many sports. But when they do, holy shit, you might just get into Year's Best Sports Writing. Just saying.
So yeah, that was definitely one thing that immediately grabbed me. But then I think too, there was just this element of this constellation of, subjects who had been victimized by this doctor and who's, were either willing to share their stories with Rae or had shared their stories in court testimony. And this feeling of kind of, again, redemption almost of, saying, you did this terrible thing to me and I'm going to sort of like redeem myself and make myself feel whole by telling my story. And I thought that was very, very moving. There is a bit of a twist on that at the end of the story that I don't want to, necessarily, not twist per se, but just an unfortunate fact of the legal system that means that sort of effort to make themselves heard and whole does not go as far as they would like it to, and as far as I'm concerned, as far as they deserve for it to. But it really felt like a story of people whose agency had been stripped from them and whose vulnerabilities had been exploited, who then were able in this story to kind of push back against the person who had done, and the system that had done that to them. So those were, the elements that really grabbed me from a storytelling perspective. And then too, Rae had a good idea of who she wanted to talk to or had already talked to. And the legal documents, they're just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of testimony, exhibits, etc. And it became, clear that there was just a very rich archive, so to speak, to draw from. And that was also, I think, a really important element in deciding to assign it.
And with stories of the atavistian nature, there's always the question of entry points and how to get into the story. So with this one, what was the kind of dialogue that you were having with Rae about getting into this to get us hooked and get us reading?
Yeah, well, I think we both felt, and I should say Jonah definitely assisted on this story because it was something that had been assigned and was sort of in the editing process while I was on sabbatical. So, he was very much part of this conversation too. But I think that having a single patient who could be our entry point, through whose experience we could see the way that this doctor operated and exploited his power, and really physically and emotionally harmed his patients. And so we wanted it to feel like we were going through this experience with a single person. And then what was great about Deborah, as we call her in the story, not only did this thing happen to her, but then she individually, unaware that she was just one of hundreds of patients who had been victimized, took it upon herself to try to hold him accountable. And there was something really moving about this person thinking that she's alone in this. And then by the end of the first section, we're able to flick at the fact that she's in no way alone, and that, she had embarked on this crusade that, the legal system, the medical system was set up to essentially have her fail at. And then there ultimately became power in numbers. And so we thought that, using her as something of a prism through which you suddenly, then can see just how expansive and multifaceted the story is going to be. And then she also has a nice, from a storytelling standpoint, she came to play an important role in the investigation into the doctor. And then by the end of the story, she is in a position now where, she's kind of, it's changed her life in a lot of different ways, and interesting ways. And so she felt like a really rich character to use sort of as our backbone in the piece.
Yeah, and some figures in this piece use their real name, and then sometimes they're pseudonyms. And what's the dialogue that you're having when you're like, okay, in this instance, it's okay to use a pseudonym, and but also you are always in the back of your mind is like you don't want to lean on that too much. And maybe you can speak to that because maybe people don't understand why we need like real names attributed to things most of the time, if not all the time.
Yeah, well, I mean, we do not use pseudonyms lightly by any means. We think it's important for people, especially when a story involves, accusations, case, actual convictions in a legal sense. People having a name attached to a source is vital to sort of the fairness of the piece, not allowing people to be able to hide behind something. But these sources in this story are the ones for whom we use pseudonyms are people who were victimized in very, very intimate ways. The doctor in question is an OBGYN, and what he did to them, in some cases, like took their reproductive systems without telling them, like put them under anesthesia and took organs that they had not consented to have taken, very much, affected their sexual lives, their reproductive lives. And, there's just a very clear degree of vulnerability for these sources. And we felt like it was important that if they did not feel comfortable with their names being attached, we could verify, everything they were telling us via court testimony and other reporting. We felt like it was important that they feel comfortable telling their stories and then not feel exposed in that process. And I should say that for the most part, I may be wrong, I don't think every single woman who testified in court did so under only her initials, but I think like 99% of them did or something. So this is just a roundabout way of saying that the legal system also protected their identities. And so that was something that, the legal system did it. We felt fine, respecting what these women wanted. And I think, more than anything, when I'm thinking about pseudonyms, et cetera, we don't want to be in a position to do harm to people who have already had harm done to them or for whom harm is a real risk. And so, we really want to come from a place of, absolutely telling a story fairly and ethically, but also with compassion. So that is a hugely important part of what we do, and when it comes to pseudonyms especially. And I will say we have an interesting story coming up. I don't want to give anything away, where a pseudonym is kind of a funny a funny aspect of the story, but that's a couple months in the future, and it's played a very different way in the story, I'll put it that way.
When you see that trust exploited, and especially in a case of this nature, where some of the, the women at the center of it, it harkened back to cases of the original, like, father of OBGYN and stuff, and Henrietta Lacks, and this invasive stuff that is just truly poisoning and damaging to the body, to the extent that they can no longer, in some cases, have a family or stuff like that. It's just, it is, this idea that we put so much trust in people in the white jacket who might not actually have our best needs, and in this case, is these women's needs at heart.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, I think, one thing I should also say about why this story grabbed me is, I am a person who has a uterus, and, OBGYNs are a feature of my life, because, since I have basically, been, I don't know, I think I saw one for the first time when I was like 17 or something. And the incredible authority that these people have over their patients, because, and there's a passage in the story where this is described. Anybody who's ever been to a gynecologist knows that a first appointment with somebody can be incredibly harrowing, because you are asked to, it's not, you go to your GP or to a new GP, and they're gonna, do you smoke? Do you drink? Like, I'm going to look inside your mouth and your ears, and I'm going to take your vitals. And with a gynecologist, it's like, are you sexually active? Like, who do you have sex with? Have you ever had a sexually transmitted disease? Please take off your clothes so I can stick a scope inside of you. Like, it is the most invasive of commonplace experiences, I guess, because it's, we're supposed to do this at least once a year for our health. And I think there's a degree to which, you not only have to trust your providers, but have been told to trust your providers. They know best. This is, your body is complicated. Your reproductive system is complicated. These people have gone to school. They've been doing this forever. And so if they recommend something, you should do it, right? And I think that one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this story is witnessing, and this, this is something I really empathized with, witnessing the, patient after patient after patient be told by this doctor, if you don't do this, you will get cancer. If you don't do this, you won't be able to have children, or, any number of things that just feels so, has such incredible gravity from, what is your life going to be like perspective. And when a person in a white coat who has examined you, or, looked at your scans or whatever it is, says, this is what you need in order to survive, be able to have children, et cetera, they say yes, over and over and over. And he is exploiting that trust, and exploiting that, sort of sociocultural authority that he is given. It's really just heartbreaking. And I think that, if you're a reader of this story, or telling, somebody about this story, I think, one of the big takeaways is, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask a doctor, okay, but can you, walk me through exactly what that procedure will entail? Can you, do I have other options? Getting a second opinion if it's a really drastic, diagnosis or suggestion or whatever. Yeah, I would never say, I don't want to tell people to do their own research, because that can lead you down like the dark, doom-filled pathways of WebMD. But definitely, being your own advocate is so important. And I think women especially, and particularly, women of color, which I am not, but, women of color, there's a long history of their bodies being marginalized and exploited, particularly in the reproductive health space. So it's okay to be your own advocate. It's okay to say, well, wait a minute, I have a question about that, or, getting a second opinion. Yeah, it was definitely enraging to read about the ways that he preyed on, again, these women's vulnerabilities. He targeted, it seems, vast majority of his patients were on Medicaid. So, people from poorer backgrounds, a lot of women of color, just really preyed on who they were, what their vulnerabilities were. And it's enraging. Just truly made me want to throw my computer across the room a few times.
Well, very nice. Well, Seyward, always a pleasure to get your side of the table on these stories, and it's great to have you back on the pod to talk about these kind of things. So, we'll kick it over to Rae now, and then just thanks for the time and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you.
All right, that was nice. Good to hear from Seyward again. Rae Nudson is here to talk about this piece, as well as that feeling of mourning that comes when the piece you had in your head and will never come to fruition, and you just have to surrender to what you've got. Earning trust from sources, using pseudonyms, and the dreaded Pint-of-Ice-Cream moment. Also, stay tuned for a parting shot, man, about that aforementioned mourning for what you hoped your book would be, and then having to roll with what you've got when you're not happy with what you've got. Okay. For starters here, I asked Rae how she arrived at this story, CNFers, so strap in.
So I've been reporting more on women's healthcare lately in my freelancing, and I was kind of looking for something that I could sink my teeth into a little bit and just kind of go more in depth to. So I kind of just poked around and went down several like Google, rabbit holes and found this story among other malpractice case, among other doctors and medical issues. But this one really stuck out to me in particular because of how horrifying it is, and how there were some stories about it and there was some national coverage about it, but nothing I had seen that was really particularly in depth. And when you consider all the like true crime and bad doctor kind of stories out there, that surprised me a little bit. I just looked further into it, and I saw that, I had a court trial and testimony, which was helpful, in material and having enough to work with. So I just looked into it and kind of ran with it.
For people who might not know the cost of maybe finding either police reports or court transcripts of that nature, like how much does that cost for you, the reporter, to find that stuff?
It costs a lot of time and money. So I used Pacer because it's a federal court case. So they have like an amount that you can get for free each month of a certain amount of pages, but this was like thousands and thousands of pages. So yeah, I mean, I think it was definitely like several $100s, which of course at first I paid for as I was reading them. And I think I did like a little bit at a time when I could, so that I could try to get, under the limit when I was able to. And then I was, for this story, reimbursed, which is not, that's pretty lucky in freelancing these days, I think, to be able to get your expenses reimbursed. So it's definitely can cost, a couple $100s if depending on the amount of documents. Other courts are easier and more cooperative to get stuff from, so it can definitely cost like your time and sanity too, depending on what you're trying to find.
Now, a moment ago, you said something, you were, looking for something to kind of sink your teeth into. And, and for you, based on what you had been reading out there and based on your own personal taste, what's the nature of depth, and what does that mean to you, when you find something that you can sink your teeth into and to kind of blow up?
Yeah, I think that what has been really important to me in my healthcare reporting particularly is to take women's pain seriously, physically and emotionally. And I think that this story in particular, like maybe I might be going on a tangent here, but maybe some of the reasons it was overlooked was because it's an OBGYN, because it's like gynecological issues and people don't want to talk about it. They don't take it seriously. People don't want to look at it, I guess, I think kind of in the, general culture. So it's important to me to be able to look at that and kind of show historical context of why that's the case, of why gynecology in particular is open to these kinds of crimes and this kind of mistreatment of patients, and to show how we got here and why people get away with it and why these patients are more susceptible to harm in certain cases. And so that's kind of what I was looking for of like, what are we looking at today, at a thing happening today, and where did it come from? Why is it like this? And kind of how does that match with my like historical understanding of the medical, industry as it is today?
And so much of the story is about, a doctor taking advantage of these patients and performing procedures on them that they didn't consent to, hysterectomies among other ectomies, if you will, in their reproductive systems, and it's such a delicate and sensitive topic. And so for you, when you were trying to find people, vectors to tell the story, like how did you, find people willing to talk and then engender a certain amount of trust to tell those stories?
It was really hard. It was really hard. A lot of people didn't want to talk about it. A lot of people didn't want to talk about it at all. A lot of people didn't want their names attached to it. That's why we use anonymous sources, because the people that were willing to talk didn't necessarily want their faces, and names to be associated with this forever. It was really difficult. And I've reported on, sensitive things before, and I've talked about people's gynecological issues before and giving birth before and things they've had trouble with before. And this was the hardest it was for me to find people that were willing to talk to me. And so I think it was just explaining where I was coming from, and that, I wanted to take them seriously and I wanted to listen, and they didn't have to share anything that they weren't comfortable with. And they could use, a pseudonym if they wanted to, and just persistence and kind of explaining who I was. And I was working on this story when I gave birth to my second child. And so I think kind of coming from it from that angle too, of, I have 2 kids and I've been through some, big medical things, and I understand how important that is and how scary that is and how vulnerable you can be. So I just kind of tried to approach it that way, and it was really hard finding people, period. There's obviously, this doctor had a lot of victims. He was a doctor for almost 40 years in this area, and so a lot of people were affected. And I think right after it happened, people were kind of spoken out about how shocked they were, and there were kind of people that spoke to the press then, but finding people to revisit that and kind of dive back into that trauma and that pain was really difficult. And one of our main sources in the story didn't respond to me for months. I mean, months and months and months didn't respond to me. And I called her for what I thought was going to be the last time, just to leave her a message and be like, okay, I'm just going to tell her like when the story's coming out and what I hope to say, and I'll just leave a message. Like, she's not going to answer. And she picked up, and we talked for an hour, and we kept talking. And that was like, she had told me, she said she, had turned down other reporters and turned down other people, but she appreciated, where I was coming from and what I was saying. And so she agreed to talk to me. So yeah, it was really, really difficult. And I think just trying to be honest and upfront with people and kind of let them be in control of their story and what they want to say helped. But for some people, I don't know why they decided to talk. It was really difficult. And then other people wanted to talk, but were in the middle of their own court cases, and so were advised not to speak by their attorneys, which I understand, and it's a shame for me as a journalist, but like, they can't do anything that would, hurt their case. So I get that too.
Right. Yeah. And you get a sense that for people going into, whatever, whether it's your general practitioner or OBGYN, if they've got the white coat on, there is just inherent trust involved. And I think it's especially true with an OBGYN, because it is such a private and invasive examination for women to go through just for routine checkups and everything. And so the fact that there was someone of this nature taking advantage of so many people, and it's particularly women of color, it just really it really calls into question who women can trust out there, and the white coat is not an impenetrable shield.
No, absolutely. And I think that's part of what makes it so devastating, is that it's this person that people are in general taught to trust, this doctor. You go there for medical advice, and especially in OBGYN, it's like you trust them with your body that you don't show other people. It's not, it's like they're looking at vaginas, at breasts, at your naked body, and it's like it's very vulnerable. And your children, like, people trust these doctors to give birth to their children, and that's itself a life-threatening thing. And so I just, it's very intimate and very important, and a lot of why I think gynecology kind of, I don't know, why patients, I guess, are maybe more vulnerable in that situation, is because those kinds of appointments and details aren't always talked about openly. Like, if you talk about going to, like, for example, my kids, I was talking about, I have 2 kids. My 2-year-old, when we prep her going to the doctor, we're like, here's what's going to happen. They're going to take your temperature, they're going to check your eyes and your nose and your throat. And so everyone knows that experience when they go to the doctor, right? But like, people don't really talk about what happens at a gynecologist openly. So people don't share that information always. And so people, when it goes wrong or when it goes how it's not supposed to, people might not be as aware of that.
And they also might not know what's worth questioning, when to push back, and how to get clarity if that dialogue isn't open.
Yeah, and I agree. And I very firmly believe that people shouldn't have to be their own doctors. Like, I should not have to know, the doctor medical name of every single surgery of, like, what they call it when you take out a certain organ, like, right? Like, I should be able to trust my doctor when he says, this is what I'm doing, in plain terms. And so I don't think people should have to know how to read an ultrasound or an x-ray, or like know what their symptoms are supposed to mean. That's why you go to the doctor. You're supposed to be able to trust the person who is credentialed, who has their license, who's operating at places that have supposedly checked them out. And there's reasons for that, right? You can't operate on yourself. You don't know what's wrong with yourself. And so, I don't think it's anyone's fault. Like, if a patient goes somewhere and a doctor says, hey, this is what's wrong with you, and it kind of makes sense based on your, general, layman's knowledge of what's going on, then, like, why would you question that? Why would you take that to somebody else when nothing seemed wrong in the first place? I just don't think that I don't think his patients were stupid. I don't think they did anything wrong. I just think he took advantage of a lot of holes in the system.
Yeah, and because, I know just from, my wife's experience of just getting an appointment with a credible gynecologist is like, sometimes like they're booking 6 or 7 months in advance. And it's like, okay, in that time, there might be something that crops up, and the sooner you nip these things in the bud, the quicker you might be able to get treatment that can lead to not dying. And so this guy at the center of your story was able to get people in and out, and he really churned it out. So that was in and of itself is very attractive to people who want to get the right care.
Yeah, and that's what I think is so nefarious about this, is that all the things he did, you could spin as a doctor taking good care of his patients, right? And that's like part of why he was able to get away with this for so long. He got people in when they needed to get in. If they didn't have transportation, if they couldn't get time off work and they only had today, he could get you in. He was fast. He supposedly respected your time. He looked like he was listening to people because they thought he was taking their pain seriously, was taking, their concerns seriously. He was looking into things when other doctors ignored them or wouldn't schedule surgeries or wouldn't tie their tubes or do what they needed done. He would do it. And so that's what's like so icky about it, is like, I mean, a lot of things are terrible about it, but he came across as this like caring doctor that took care of things and took care of his patients and looked into it and did the procedures and got it taken care of quickly, and all of that made people feel taken care of. But all of that was, if you look at it from the other point of view, that was taking advantage of everybody. Those were all the same ways that he got away with what he was doing.
Yeah, that's part of the con of it all, because the fact that if a doctor would go to those lengths, you'd be like, wow, he really does have my best interest at heart. But that was just part of the long game to just get more widgets into the factory that he could churn out, at his clinic, and then certainly at the hospitals where he would perform many of his procedures. It throws into question just it makes you wonder who you can trust.
Right. And I think that these patients that I spoke with, how do they go to another doctor again? Like, their trust in any medical system and any legal system is just broken, and they don't trust anyone. Like, how would you? Like, I talked to a patient who went to an ultrasound after after his trial and after everything went down, and the ultrasound tech asked if she had an ovary removed, and she thought, oh my God, did I? Like, I don't know. Like, she didn't know if she still had all of her organs, because this was her doctor and he performed so many procedures on her. And like, I just like can't imagine not being sure of like what's in your body and what happened to you. And like, going to somebody after that, like, you still have to go to doctors, right? Like, you're still a person. You might need something, you might need help with something or need something done. It's not like you can avoid them forever. And trying to go to someone and have any trust, it's just irreparably broken for some of these women.
And the piece too, it has obviously those undertones of a lot of the racist science that was performed on, untold, just so sad of what, and tragic was what happened to a lot of enslaved black women, to, and then just fast forwarding to even, Henrietta Lacks and everything that's gone on there. So, when you were stumbling upon that, like, just how illuminating was that stuff to come across, and, what did that say about this, and how did that inform your piece?
Yeah, it definitely informed it. I think I tried to report it coming from that context of this branch of medicine is built on the bodies of enslaved black women. Doctors in this field of medicine in particular made their name and made money and crafted procedures by violating these women, by performing experimental surgeries on these women. When birth control was developed, there were, medical trials on women in insane asylums who did not consent. And so I think that it's just, you can find so many instances, especially in gynecology throughout history in the United States, where women's bodies were seen as incidental to the medical progress to be made, or as incidental to the doctor making money or making his name or getting famous for a certain type of surgery. And I think I tried to approach reporting the story in that way of understanding that everything that kind of goes on in gynecology today has that history, and that's still very much present in the kind of doctoring that happens today. Even with good doctors, it's like the system is set up to take advantage of people. The people that are protected are not necessarily the patients, and I just think that comes from a long context and long history of women and patients being taken advantage of in particular.
And as action was starting to be taken, this notion of like sovereign immunity comes into play, and maybe explain what that is and how that comes to play in this story.
Yeah, so sovereign immunity is basically a legal, loophole, I guess, where you can't sue the state without the state's permission. So it's been in the United States legal system like since it began. It's kind of a thing, I think, that came from England. They like borrowed it from England's legal system when they were setting up the United States legal system. And so if an entity like a hospital is set up as a public entity that's like government backed. Like Chesapeake Regional is a hospital that has a governing board that is appointed by city council, and it was established as a nonprofit hospital by the city. And so it is a city run, government entity technically. And so you can't sue the hospital. It falls under this sovereign immunity where because it's this municipal entity, people can't really sue the hospital. And one of the patients tried, and a lot of patients tried actually. I think several patients named the hospital in their suits, and every single time it got taken off the suit. If one reason didn't work, then the legal team would try another reason. And what ended up working and getting the hospital removed from the suit was sovereign immunity, was saying that like, oh, actually, like you can't even sue this entity at all. So people would try to hold the hospital accountable and try to, include it in malpractice suits or say, that they were partially responsible and that they, should be held accountable and provide compensation. And they were just kind of left out of it because of the sovereign immunity. And a private hospital does not fall under that umbrella. And just like a private store or company is partially responsible for the actions of its employees as they carry out day to day, their job duties. If an employee is carrying out their job duties and does harm, that company is partially responsible. But in a sovereign immunity case, they're not.
Yeah, it's so thorny that they clearly where wrong has been done, and they're just still trying. There are ways to kind of weasel out of it. It's just an even greater injustice in some, not greater injustice, but every bit of an injustice where it's just like, sorry this happened to you, but I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, and it's wild because it's like a person can't just walk into a hospital and perform a surgery, right? Like that would be illegal. That's assault. Like that's not a thing that can happen. So like they have to credential the doctor. The doctor signs papers or gets checked out or does whatever they need to do to be able to work there. And so people, there's, I don't know of a good equivalency, but it's like they give permission basically for this doctor to perform there and to do operations, but the hospital claims that they're not responsible for this doctor's actions, even though they checked the doctor out and said it was okay for you to operate here. So it's just this legal mess that this hospital is taking advantage of to not accept or take any responsibility for the things that happened in its operating rooms. And it just kills me. It kills me because the hospital made money from Dr. Perway's operating at the hospital. It's like they got to charge insurance companies for the patients that stayed there, for the operations that happened. And so they made money from it, and they're expanding. Like the hospitals are expanding, they're growing, they're adding new beds, they're adding new machinery, they're doing new things because of money they've made over the past, however many years. And part of that money came from women's organs being stolen, from procedures that were done without their consent. And it's just like, how do you square that? How do you take that money and do something with it and know that it came on the back of these women and patients that you were supposed to protect, that you were supposed to help? And I just like, it just kills me. And I can't, it kills a lot of people. A lot of the patients that I spoke with feel very betrayed about it and feel like the hospital is just as big of a story as the doctor.
Yeah, and this is by no means an equal comparison, but it's kind of like an athlete who has like, I don't know, is a bit of a, let's just say a handful, but he's really good. And so the team will be like, we're just going to kind of turn a blind eye. The better you are, the more they'll put up with your bullshit. And it's kind of like he was able to perform so many procedures that, like you said, basically made this hospital, probably millions of dollars that they're able to just put more beds, get more patients in there for whatever procedures are going to happen. They're going to keep growing and growing and growing. And so this is like built on a very just almost an evil foundation, and that doesn't square.
Yeah, and I think that's true about the entire healthcare system, right? It's, in many ways a for profit. And this is technically a not for profit hospital, but it has to make money to do, that doesn't mean that it doesn't make money. That means that it just doesn't go to certain places, that money. So yeah, it's our whole healthcare system is set up in a way that it has to be making money. And so that again creates the opportunity for these things to happen for someone who is making money to get away with terrible things because the hospital needs money to be able to continue being a hospital.
And something I like to talk about also is kind of like, as we get into the writing of the piece, is when you're thinking about structure and maybe even entry points of a story of this nature, and you dive in with Deborah and her experience here, and so there's just in terms of constructing the story and sitting down to write this thing, just how did that set itself up to be the entry point for this?
Yeah, I mean, Deborah's story was always one that we hoped to start the piece with, but she is the source that didn't respond to me for a really long time. And so we just weren't sure what we would feel comfortable. And so she filed a lawsuit herself in federal court, which I was able to get a hold of the documents from that lawsuit. So I knew a lot of what happened in her story before I spoke with her. And then I saw also that she testified in the Perwaze trial. And so I had a lot of what happened to her and was super interested in her story because it's so compelling. I mean, she, tried to sue this doctor all by herself when a lawyer wouldn't take her malpractice case. And so her, tenacity and the way she approaches things was always really admirable to me, and really it was a good story, and she was someone I felt like I could really relate to. Of she tried to be on top of things and on top of her health, and she got a bad test result and was trying to take care of it and do the right thing, and she just got taken advantage of and ended up in a really horrible situation. And so her story was always very dramatic and very interesting, and we were really hoping to start out with that. But like I said, I didn't get in touch with her for many months while reporting the story, and so we weren't sure if we wanted to lead off with this kind of story without talking to the person and making sure that they were okay with it, and we weren't sure if we were going to use her name or not, and things like that. And so we tried to do it mostly chronologically, is kind of how we at least started the structure. And then with the hope that we could lead with Deborah's story and get in touch with her. And luckily, we did get in touch with her, and she was okay with us using her story, and she was able to talk to us, and she was amazing to talk to. And like I said, I just really admire her, the way she views things, and her tenacity, and the way she tries to look out for other people. And it was really an honor to speak with her and to speak with everyone that I spoke with. But yeah, so we really wanted to start with her, and we kind of tried to set things up chronologically and then kind of take it from there. But there was a question of whether we would start with her or not, or whether if I needed to go deeper into another patient's story that I had spoken with, and maybe we should start with that. And so it kind of, I think at one point Deborah's story was not the lead, but then after we got a hold of her and got it worked out, we put it back at the top. So that's kind of where we started, and then kind of hope to take it chronologically from there, even though we kind of go back and forth a little bit in the structure. It's mostly things were going well until they weren't, and then things fall apart pretty spectacularly.
All right. At what point in the research and the reporting do you start to feel confident that you can then begin the writing?
Oh boy, I was not very confident about, I mean, I struggled with this a lot. Like I said, it was really hard for me to get people on the record. Um, so I ended up going to Virginia several months into my reporting so that I could talk to people face to face. And after that is when I felt like I could start writing, because I talked to several of the patients. We sat down for a long time and we spoke, and I felt like I had it after that. So after I went to Virginia, I saw, where things were happening in the hospitals, the doctor's offices. I talked with the patients face to face. That is the point where I started writing, and I still had a lot to do after that. I still hadn't made contact with Deborah, and I still had follow up calls and stuff like that. But yeah, that's the point where I started kind of outlining and started drafting just to see what I was missing and see how far I could get and see kind of what else I still needed to do.
Do you get a sense that, a lot of people, a lot of writers or journalists, it's just there's never a moment when you're ready to write. You have to just kind of write before you feel like you're ready, and then you kind of figure it out there as you're laying down road?
Oh yeah, definitely. I feel like that. I just feel like I'm a person that has to just start and see where I get to, and that's not to say I don't outline or anything, because I do, but I just need to start and then see what gaps there are and see what we need to fill in and see where we need it to go. So yeah, I definitely feel like I had to just start and I had to just go. And I also have two small children, and so I don't have a lot of time to just sit down and start where I want to start. I have to just take the time that I have and just go do as much as I can in the pockets of time that I have. And so that kind of forces my hand a little bit too.
Yeah, maybe expand on that a little bit, because if any popular creativity influencer out there is just like, you gotta carve out this amount of time to do your writing and blah blah blah. But for someone like yourself who might have just agents of chaos running around, and you're like, do I have a half hour today or 2 hours, 90 minutes or 20 minutes? I don't know. So how have you cultivated a sense of, this is how I can get work done amidst unpredictability?
Yeah, I don't know if there's like a real good sense of it, or you just like are so panicked you just go. And so I think when I had some time, I just was like, okay, I gotta go. I gotta get this done. I did a little bit after bedtimes here and there. My husband is incredibly supportive of what I was doing, and so we would schedule blocks of time for me to go work. So it was like an hour here, 2 hours there, 30 minutes, stuff like that, where I really was able to get the job done. And then if something came up, then you just kind of have to run with it, and like there isn't time to just sit and wonder what you're going to do. So if one thing isn't working, then I'm going to go to another section, or I'm going to look at another thing I need to look at, because I can't just like sit down and do nothing when I have those pockets of time available.
It's crazy. Sometimes when I talk to people who feel like they don't have enough time to write, whatever it might be it an essay, book, or memoir, whatever they're working on, there's this idea that you need like that, that 4 or 5 hours of at a time to sink in. And sometimes I tell people, like if you got 10 minutes, just set that timer for 10 minutes and you'll be surprised what you can get done in 10 minutes. And it's kind of, hearing what you say kind of echoes that. It's just like, okay, I have this block of time. And I imagine that over the time that you've developed this, that you've probably been surprised with yourself what you can get done when you're like, okay, I might have 20 minutes, let's go. And you get quite a bit done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've also set timers, of like, okay, I have 15 minutes, like let's just get something done in that amount of time. And I think part of it is just working with what you've got. And so you need to just go as much as you can. And then part of it, like I said, is kind of sheer panic of like, oh, I have to get this done and I have a lot of words to go, And so, yeah, but I think that's just how you build something big. You have to just do it a little bit at a time. And when I was working on my book, I got up, I had another job. I'm got up early and would do a little bit at a time. And like people would talk about, like writing 4 or 5 hours or days at a time or weekends at a time. I write paragraphs at a time. Like I write sentences at a time, because I just don't have necessarily the time that's going to lead to pages and pages. And plus I don't have like the mental capacity to just sit and write for 5 hours at a time. Maybe people do, but I just don't think I can do that necessarily and still get something worthwhile at the end of it. Like at a certain point, my brain is fried anyway, and I need to take a break. So that's just for me sometimes how it shakes out anyway. I kind of wonder sometimes, like, what would it have been like if I had days and weekends and hours to sit uninterrupted to do that. And like I don't know, but I also think that sometimes you just have to call it done because I could still be working on this, right? Like I see things that I want to get deeper into or do differently or you know, write better, but I just don't. It just sometimes it just has to be done.
Yeah, there comes a point. I'm starting to feel the crunch of this book deadline I'm on, and there's there's this moment where like you kind of have over the course of the writing, the reporting, you have like the vision of what you hope the article or the book is going to be, and then the closer and closer you get to the deadline, you're like, eventually you have to just resign yourself to
Yeah.
just the material you've got and what you're at the mercy of, and just surrender to that and do the best you can. And I'm right in that moment where I'm having to kind of resign myself to that surrender. And is that something you've experienced?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that because I know the women who couldn't talk to me, because I know some of the stories that I'm missing or I couldn't get to, or the sources that wouldn't agree to speak with me, it like, I know several other ways this story could have looked. I know several other stories that I'm missing that I wish I could have included. And so that is really hard. Like it could have gone a lot of different ways, and I am bummed about that. Like I'm bummed that these people couldn't get on the
Yeah.
record with me. I'm bummed that I couldn't talk to people I wanted to talk with, and so I know what's missing. But I don't. I mean, hopefully the story in its final version doesn't feel like anything's missing. But yeah, for sure, I like know the things that could have been included and I couldn't get. But yeah, it's like as a journalist, you don't get the best story that exists from what happened. You get the best story from what people will say to you, right? And so that's like you said, like you have the material you have the people that will talk to you, and you just have to do what you can with that.
Yeah. And and I guess if it's done right, the reader won't know any different, and it's going to be like, oh, this is fine. But like deep down, you know, like, man, there were 50 more people I wish I could have spoken to for this. I just didn't have the time, or no one returned my calls. And then you're kind of left with this ache of what might have been. And
Yeah.
that's truly what I'm wrestling with at the moment. I got to get my head, I got to get out of that headspace. But right now it's just like I'm mourning for the people that I haven't been able to reach yet, even though I still might be able to get them. I'm like, it's just kind of eating me up. Like this isn't going to be what I thought it was going to be. And it's killing me.
Oh yeah. I had like some very like gonna eat a pint of ice cream, like to lay on the floor kind of days, because it was like I was like so close to like getting some interviews that I really wanted and that I thought would like make a really good story. And these people, like I said, like some of them wanted to speak with me. And so it felt so unfair of like they wanted to share their story of what happened to them. I wanted to talk to them. Someone out there probably wants to read about it. And there was this thing of this, you know, court case or these legal things going on where they couldn't speak or felt like they couldn't speak. And I think that's probably true with a lot of people that work at the hospital too. You know, they just don't feel comfortable responding, or they still work there and are afraid for their jobs, or you know, what have you. And so yeah, I just felt like I don't know if this is going to work out. Like no one will talk to me. These people want to and they can't, or they can't because of X, Y, and Z. And so yeah, I just felt really unsure about what we were going to get. But I think, yeah, I don't know. Like I said, the people I did talk to were amazing, were so forthcoming with something so vulnerable. And I really feel honored to be able to speak with them about it and that they trusted me with something so vulnerable. And so yeah, I mean, eventually I got to a point where I'm more at peace with what it looks like and what I'm missing. But yeah, there's definitely kind of a I know what this could have been. But also just with this doctor and with his patients and his stories, there's so many people who are affected that you could write one of these stories for every single patient probably,
Mm-hmm.
because they're so affecting, and there's so many lives were changed and so many horrific things were done. And so, yeah, it's like at some point you have to decide what to include.
What would you identify as something, your strengths in your craft, be it the reporting, the research, or the writing, the rewriting, editing, and so forth? And how do you maybe like try to double down on those instead of a lot of us, we were like, I'm shitty at that, and I'm just gonna focus on how crappy I am, and at the
I definitely do some of that too. Yeah. I think my strength is definitely in reporting and researching. I want to tell the clearest story, but I don't know that I'm like a writerly writer. Like I just don't know. Other people I think are way better at wordsmithing than I am, for instance. But I think that I can find people, I can talk to people, I can find documents, I can make connections. And I think I'm good at talking to people. Like I think I've talked to people about some pretty vulnerable things, and I tried to get some good details and try to listen to their story. And I think I'm good at listening. So yeah, so I think I'm definitely stronger at reporting and researching than I am at crafting a beautiful sentence. This story I think is so, like, you don't have to be a beautiful writer to tell this story. It
right.
kind of tells itself. It's like the things that happened are what's important. And so I think, simplicity and clarity is what's important. In this case for this kind of story.
Oh, 100%. I think a lot of people, they might get into this thinking they can write their way out of a reporting problem. And the better reporter and researcher you are, the easier the writing is. And the more you can just let the story do the heavy lifting. All you're doing is you're kind of just a messenger for the story, and just greasing those skids with all that great, research and reporting that you did. And then you don't have to try to light fireworks on the page. There's a time and a place for that. But, in a story of this nature, you don't want to get in the way of everyone who, like you said earlier, that you were honored to tell their story. You don't want to get in the way of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, they're so harrowing and so emotional on their own. Yeah, it's like you don't need me to dress up what happened to Deborah. Like she did that. She did that on her own, and what she went through, and what she said about herself is way more interesting than what I could say about her. And so yeah, it just and I do feel like I feel like it was so much reporting and so much information to distill and to go through. But that also meant that if we had a question or were wondering about something, I usually had the information available to answer that question or to fill in. So yeah, so I think because of that, it was helpful to in the editing process, or if someone was like, well, what happened at this point? It's not usually because I didn't know. It's because I maybe didn't, word it clearly the first time around or something like that.
And what kind of systems have you put in place so you have good access to all the information you've curated, so you can access that as you craft the piece?
Yeah, it's a process for sure. So I use Scrivener to write, and I have folders for a lot of different things. So I have folders for like the sources that I talk to, the interviews, and the information about those women. I have sources for folders for the locations, the hospitals, what happened there, like their addresses, information that I need on those. I have folders for the court testimony, and I put like the PDFs, of the testimony in there. And then as I was reading through them, I would kind of make my own index of like, here's on what page this person starts talking, here's who they are, here's like a couple keywords of what they talk about. And so that was a way for me to be able to search through my own files to find what I needed, and to be able to look at kind of like an index or a table of contents almost of the court testimony itself, which I said is like thousands of pages. And so, yeah, it's kind of a process. And I had a timeline that I created in Excel. And in the timeline, I would have, the date, the thing that happened, and the document that I found it from, and the page number that it was on. And that was something helpful for me so that I could go back to it and find it, and also helpful for our fact checker, hopefully, so that I could share all my documents and the timeline and, the index. And if we had a question about where did we get this information, or can we clarify, X, Y, and Z, I could look and say, oh, that's on day 5 of the testimony. Here's what page it's on, and here's the witness that was speaking. So that's what I did. And that's I guess it was a process that expanded as I started working on it. But one thing I wanted to be sure and do was have that timeline and be able, when I was reading and taking notes on the testimony, to make sure that I had like who was speaking and on what page they started and stuff like that.
And when you're done with the piece and you submit it, and it's by and large pretty well done, what's the prevailing feeling that you experience at the completion of a piece of this nature?
Oh, relief, for sure. Mm-hmm. Relief. It just feels like a huge weight lifted. And even I'm sure at the point I'm talking to you, it hasn't been published yet. So I feel like I'm sure there will be things that come with that and feelings. But every step we get closer feels like a little bit lighter, of a little bit like, okay, that weight was taken off. Like, let's go to the next thing, And so, yeah, the first time I turned in a draft, it just was like I've been working on it for months and months, and it just felt like, okay, I can actually like relax this weekend. Like, I don't have to be working right now. So that was good. It was definitely relief for sure. But I still, to be honest with you, I still haven't like closed all my computer tabs. Like, I still have my Scrivener doc open. Like, I haven't shut the door yet because I'm afraid something else will come up.
Yeah, just that sense of panic. This living thing is just, it's never going to die. It's always going to be there.
Right. Yeah.
Well, very nice, Rae. Well, before I let you get going, is thing I love to ask writers at the end of the show is just a recommendation of some kind for the listeners. And that can just be anything you're excited about. So I'd extend that to you. What might you recommend for the listeners out there?
Yeah, I have a podcast recommendation. Actually, The Retrievals came out from Serial earlier this year, and it is about a fertility clinic where a person that worked at the clinic replaced fentanyl and pain medication with saline solution. So women were undergoing procedures without pain medication at this fertility clinic. And the podcast is just a really wonderfully done, and it's another thing that takes women's pain seriously, and it kind of shows the cracks and the holes in the system that allowed these things to happen. And it shows how, again, women aren't necessarily taken seriously when they talk about their pain, and the real repercussions that has. So yeah, the Retrievals podcast was a really tough listen, but really really wonderful.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Rae, just this piece is an incredible piece of journalism, and it was a treat to read. As hard as it was the subject matter, it was a truly a gripping read, and I hope this shines a light, and it definitely does justice to the people who entrusted you with their story. So thanks for the work, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. That means a lot. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening, CNFers. Thanks for another fine year of CNF Pod. Thanks to Seyward for keeping this Atavistian train going. Thanks to Jonah as well. And for this particular episode, thanks to Rae for making the time and talking some shop. It being the final episode of 2023, I know many of you are likely looking to the new year with new goals. Be it for your writing, or maybe your body, or your mind. Or maybe you're like, I'm not getting on that resolution treadmill at all. I'm sick of it. And I'm just gonna call it a win to merely get out of bed in the morning. I have one goal, and it's not really a resolution, and it's to just be sure I hit this deadline, which is accelerating at me. I'm at the event horizon, and by the time you hear this parting shot, I will have crossed into the 80,000 words territory. None read, by the way. None of it divided into chapters. I have no idea what I'm doing. I still have a ton of research and interviews to conduct. I still have to clean up transcripts because Otter, the transcribing service, is terrible, and you have to comb through it all. You have to. And there it is illegible. It'll come up with these words and be like, that's not right. That's not even close. Okay, but after all that throat clearing, this is my point. I'm reaching the phase where I have to just resign myself to the book that's in front of me and not the book I want to write anymore. I'll never track down certain people. After a dozen voicemails, they're not going to call me back. Sure, there's likely 100 articles in random newspaper archives I have no idea exist that will lay untouched by me because I couldn't travel to them or access them, or, like I said, didn't even know they were there, on account of maybe not having quite enough time. Or maybe I did have enough time and I wasted it. It's mourning the book that might have been for the book you have to complete. So, no, I don't feel good about what I've done and what will hopefully come out if my contract isn't voided. Did I not hustle enough? Did I not ask good enough probing, deep, non-superficial questions? Did I cheap out by not physically traveling to places, though I couldn't because of certain home circumstances? There's just no way I could leave. Did I waste too much time on newspapers.com or sportsillustrated.com? Doing research, not just reading random stuff. Did I start writing too late? There was a point where I worried whether or not I'd reach 85,000 words, which is the low end of the contractually obligated word count. Finding relatively new material. Now my worry is that I'm going to have, is there going to be enough time for me to just write through my timeline? This draft might be, it feels like it's on pace to be 120,000 words long. I hope for everyone's sake that's not true. With little more than 3 months to go, we're likely looking at more writing and rewriting. And if I'm lucky enough, maybe I'll land a few new phone calls here and there that I can pepper out throughout. Got to follow up with certain people, too, to flesh out other details. Then so be it. It's just about that time where you just have to surrender to what you've got. And I'm grossly unsatisfied with what I've got, which is a bummer. It's sad for the story. And it's sad for my future writing books. I mean, if this doesn't pan out, it's bartending time. That's about all I'm qualified to do. Anyway, 2024 is here. I dread it. I wish it wasn't coming. But for the person who is so scared of not finishing, almost to the point of paralysis, I can feel good about this. It's a fucking leap year, man. One extra day. Happy New Year, CNFers. If you can't do, interview. See ya.